My daughter was in 5th grade, and she was being socially transitioned by her school behind my back.
And say what that means.
So what that means is that the school was using a name that she made up, so not her name that was given to her, and different pronouns for her. And she was actually using, she didn't use the girls' bathroom, for instance. She used the bathroom in the office. If she would have been, she was 10, 11 years old when this was happening. If she would have been older, in my state, at 13, she could have gone in opposite sex spaces without me ever even knowing. I did not know that this therapist, from the first moment she sat down with my child, so I had to give permission, again, because she was under 13. At 13, she could have gone and I never would have known. That's important.
Yeah.
Because it's an issue in our state that's very terrifying for a lot of parents. But she was using male pronouns and the made-up name for my daughter for the first half hour she sat down with her. She saw her for, and I didn't know this, she saw her for a half hour once a week for 2.5 months, so a total of 5 hours. And she called me right before the pandemic hit, and she was using the male pronouns and the made-up name, and she was telling me that she wanted to have a meeting with me, my husband, and my daughter to help her come out to us as a boy. Actually canceled the meeting with this therapist. The other thing that was happening was she told us that our daughter wanted to be in the boys' cabin for 5th grade camp, which we were never going to allow because that's just dangerous. And she had a male teacher. I mean, she would have been in a cabin with boys and a male teacher. I recently found out that that male teacher actually asked her if she wanted to be in the boys' cabin. So it was presented to me as though she had asked to be in the boys' cabin. But what happened was he asked her. So I've had conversations with my daughter recently because she's desisted. Now that's because I pulled her out of school when all this happened. We pulled her out of school. I homeschool her now. We took all of her devices. She was not in her friend group, which was all LGBTQ, 10, 11-year-olds. And so we pulled her out of all the influences, and slowly over time, she desisted, which goes against, what all the professionals are saying. They say once a kid says that, they know themselves, right? Well, I mean, my story goes against that narrative. My daughter's story goes against that narrative. All the professionals are saying we have to affirm. The president says that's the thing to do. And if we had affirmed, and if we had left her in that situation, where would she be now? She might be, taking drugs and having surgeries.
Had she been told in the 3rd grade that you can, that gender identity is a thing? You can be a boy, girl, both or neither, depending upon?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't actually think that's where she got the idea. She was in, she's an artist,
yeah.
And a lot of the kids who fall into this are artistic. They get in online drawing forums, and so she was in an online drawing forum with some friends, and that is where she learned about these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure that she learned them at school, although I know they're teaching it at school now as low as kindergarten.
Yeah.
I'm really concerned about those kids. But
So even just through peer influence, she got there at a very
Yes.
young age. This is before the school's really doing it at scale, but now the schools are doing it.
yeah,
So they're priming, they're going to multiply this by...
it's going to be exponential. What's going to happen? These kids are like in formative years, and they're teaching this stuff to them. They're teaching them that they might not be, the sex they were born as.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the thing. She didn't just all of a sudden one day say, I'm transgender.
Yeah.
She was getting these ideas from her friends online, and it was like she started with a romantic, at 10 years old.
Right.
Of course, she's aromantic.
Yeah.
And then she went on to like demisexual and non-binary and gay. I mean, she went through all these different identities. I mean, wouldn't have even known to call them identities at that time. But I just thought that
So how old was she when she was doing this?
10, 11.
How long did it take you to pull her out of it, and what form did it take, and what did you do, and how did you get to the point where you can say that she desisted? And when you say she what does that mean? She's like, yeah, I'm a girl, of course. I mean, what was I even thinking? Is that basically?
Yes, that is what
Yeah.
she knows. She's a girl now.
Right.
She actually kind of looks back on it now like, she was young and she didn't know any better, right? Which, it's true.
Right.
But she's 13 now.
Yeah.
But it took a while. So it took a while, like I said, she went through all these identities. It took her a while to end up on transgender.
Yeah.
And it took her a little over a year, I'd say. And it took her about that much time to come out of it. So what happened was, at first, I started with, well, why do you feel like you're a boy? And honestly, that she was defensive when I said that. Well, I just have always felt that way. She didn't really have much explanation. I don't like, girly stuff, and I backed off on just going direct at the transgender identity, and I started just talking about, you can't always trust doctors. And we talked about the opioid crisis and how doctors can be incentivized to do things that aren't really good for you. We talked about other things in history. We talked about cults. We talked about Scientology. We watched some documentaries. So I just started talking about things that I thought were parallel to what was happening, parallels in history.
Yeah.
And then eventually we got to the point where I talked about detransitioners and how they, were really encouraged. Everybody loved them when they decided that they were transgender. They got all kinds of attention, a new friend group, all this stuff. And then, later when they got older and realized that it was a mistake and they had done these medical things to themselves, when they changed their mind, all those people who loved them so much dropped them. In fact, were nasty to them.
Yeah.
And she was like, well, that's just like a cult.
Get her to. So you took away her devices.
Yep,
You saw what she was doing and who she was talking to.
I did.
So you learned about the online drawing courses and.
Yeah, I
And
found out.
What did you see there? It was all just like kids being like, "Oh, you're non-binary." Or you're
Yes, and they were all having sort of like these online relationships. It seemed very silly to me.
Right.
But there were also kids talking about cutting,
Yeah.
talking about suicide.
Yeah.
She learned that stuff online. It was a surprise to me when I got that call from the therapist. But of course I was concerned, which is why I allowed her to see that therapist.
And this is all just a normal part of elementary school life in certain schools, certain parts of the country, where like half the girls will be non-binary or trans or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true of the middle school, right? Like.
Oh yeah.
And the parents just accept it, they affirm it, they feel it's weird,
There's a lot of pressure on parents.
Yeah.
I think that most of the parents, because the doctors and the teachers and the therapists, all the professionals are putting pressure on these parents, and they're saying you have to accept your child and you have to affirm them, otherwise they might commit suicide. And that's scary. That's terrifying. It's like blackmailing parents.
You weren't exposed to that because you didn't go to the meeting. Do you think you could have been blackmailed into it if you had gone, or did you have enough wherewithal to be like, no, she's not a boy?
Well, that's a really good question. I thought there was something weird about this whole thing. It wasn't making sense to me.
Yeah.
She had just had a sleepover with a bunch of girls. Why did she need to be in the boys' cabin? That didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I should make that clear. When she told me recently, the teacher asked her, so I said, what gave you the idea to go into the boys' cabin? And she said, that wasn't my idea. That was my teacher's idea.
Yeah.
And when he asked her that, she felt like she had to say yes, because she had already told the whole school that she was a boy. You know, what? Oh, yeah, I guess I have to say yes. Well, then shortly after that, and I didn't realize at the time why, she told me she didn't want to go to the camp.
Right.
So this teacher was leading her.
Yeah.
And I think that's happening quite a bit. And I didn't think there were that many kids that you know, were like that, right?
But you knew all her friends were LGBTQ identified already?
So here's the thing. She didn't just all of a sudden one day say, I'm transgender.
Yeah.
She was getting these ideas from her friends online, and it was like she started with aromantic, you know, at 10 years old.
Right.
Of course she's aromantic.
Yeah.
And then she went on to like demisexual and non-binary and gay. I mean, she went through all these different identities. I mean, wouldn't have even known to call them identities at that time. But I just thought that...
So how old was she when she was doing this?
10, 11.